Hello, Dr. Dan. This is our project. We made the paintball game from iMessage Game, where there is a shooter and a dodger, and there are three barrels to hide from. So the dodger picks where it's the person where they're hiding, and then the shooter picks where they think the dodger is hiding, and then they shoot. And if the dodger is hiding the place where the shooter is shot, then they get hit, and that's score. And yeah, that's a very simple game that we picked. And Eric will go over the setup and how we built it. Go ahead.
All right, so we're including a couple libraries like the M5 Unified and then a couple BLE libraries. And then we're defining our UUID definitions for our service and our characteristic. And then we have some game constants and then some global variables like device connected, Dodger input received, and then notification received. And then we're defining some BLE server, BLE service, and then characteristic, and then a remote characteristic as well, and then our BLE client. And then below that, we have some role definitions. So our device role, and then below that, we have our shooter game states. And we're also initializing these with default states. And then below that, we have our Dodger game states. And then below that, we have our global game variables. So our round number, our game over Boolean, and then our round result safe. So this is true or false depending on if the Dodger is safe or not. And then below that, we have our shot choices. And then we have our UI layout constraints, so our screen width and our screen height. And that's just the screen width and height of the M5 Core 2 device. And then below that, we have our selection button dimensions. And then we also have our barrel button dimensions and positions. And then below all of that, we have our gradient color, so our top gradient color, and then our bottom gradient color. And then Marta, if you just scroll down a little bit more. And then we have our touch debounce, so our last touch time, and then our touch debounce, which is 300 milliseconds. And then we have our helper function. So this is point and rect. So this just checks if a point lies in a rectangle. So for our button presses. And then we also have another helper function, draw gradient background. And this just draws a vertical gradient background. And then below that, we have another helper function. This is draw paintball button. So this just draws paintball buttons that the shooter will select, and it also has a spotter effect. And we're using a switch and passing in the ball number, and we're iterating through our different positions, 1, 2, and 3 for our different colors for the spotter. And then below all that, we have our BLE server callback classes, so our onConnect and our onDisconnect. Marty, can you scroll down a little bit more? Yeah, there we go. So we have our onConnect and then our onDisconnect. And then below that, we have our characteristic callbacks. So this just handles our BLE characteristic write events for the server. And it's just used to receive the Dodger's choice from the client. And the onWrite method inside is called whenever the client writes to the characteristic. And then we retrieve the value written by the client using get value. And then we process that information. And then we just log the value for that. And then below that, we have our notify callback function. So this just uses our notifiers. And then below that, we have our setup functions or a setup BLE server. So this sets up our server and we give it the M5 Core 2 shooter name. And then we run our create server function. And then we set the callbacks that we defined above. And then we create our service and we pass in our service UUID. And then we also define the characteristics and we run our create characteristic function. And we pass in our 3 different characteristics along with our characteristic UUID. And then we go ahead and set our callbacks for this as well, set our initial value for this characteristic. And then we start our advertising. And then we pass in the service UUID. We scan through, and then we go ahead and start our advertising. And then below that, we have our setup BLE client function. And this just initializes the BLE client device as a client. So we run our init, and then we create client. And then we start scanning for BLE devices using get scan. And we pass in whatever that results into a PBLE scan uh, object that we create. And then we loop through in a while loop until the desired server is found. Um, we scan for about 5 seconds. And then we iterate through the found devices to locate the one that's advertising the desired service UUID using a for loop. And then we go ahead and break that loop if the server is found. And then if it's not found, we go ahead and print that the server is not found and rescanning. And then below that, we connect to the found BLE server. And we do that using our connect function, and we pass in the device. And then below that, we retrieve the remote service from the server using our UUID. We use the get service function. And then we exit if the service isn't found with our if statement. And then below that, we retrieve the characteristic from the service using our characteristic UUID, and we're using the get characteristic function. And then we have a couple if statements just for error handling. And then we go ahead and register the notification if the characteristic supports it, and we check that using can notify. And if it does, then we go ahead and use our register for notify, and we pass in our notify callback. And then we go ahead and log that the BLE client setup's complete.
All right, so this is the UI setup for the game. So basically we start off with those uh four function calls right there, which are basically going over the screens that are gonna occur throughout the game when somebody wins, loses, setting up, and then starting all over. So we start off with the draw roll selection screen, and this is kind of setting the X and Y coordinates of both players. And then we're using the draw functions to create the two players. And then once we're done with that, we print out the role selection screen drawn, and we're just kind of putting into words what exactly is happening. And then going down to the next function, draw game screen. This is the initialization screen. So as you can see, it draws the gradient colors and sets the background and stuff. So and then it starts off by saying the round, and it takes in things like the number of the rounds and then as well as the max amount of rounds that will be played. And then we have if and else statements here to let the user know who is next, like waiting for dodger or pick a shot or safe or hit. And we're kind of doing that to let the user know what exactly is happening and to make sure that there's no confusion on the front end and the back end as to who's winning and who got the point. And then moving on to draw game over screen. This is the screen that we play when one of the people has lost, the shooter or the dodger, whoever had recently gone last. And here you can see we use the simple if else statement to say you won or lost. And then once that over is, or once that's over, we will fill in the rectangles again using the draw functions, and then we will print out restart, and then we will print out game over screen drawn, and that will reset it. And then lastly, the reset game. This is the helper function that actually resets the game and resets all of the variables like the round number and the game over and things like that all the way back to zeros for dodger choice and shooter choice. Then we're also printing out game reset, which is letting the the user know that the game has been reset and that a new game is about to begin. Then going past that, there's void setup, and this is actually calling the functions that we had or I had previously just gone over. So we're configuring the device and then we're drawing the background, and then we will print out setup starting system. And then this is where we begin to call out the functions that I just called. So for example, the draw roll selection screen, and then you will pick if you're the dodger or the shooter. And then that's kind of while it's running. So we have a while loop, and that is controlling things like the time and as well as the X and Y position of the players. And then we're printing out things like roll selection touch. using the X and Y coordinates, and then the role selected, we're letting the user know what they selected, just again, so that there's no confusion. Then going past that, we're using an if and else statement to decide or to let the user pick if they want to be the shooter or the dodger first. So if they choose the role of the shooter, then we will begin the shooter state, and then we will draw the shooter mode. And then vice versa, if they choose the dodger state, we will set the dodger state to dodger waiting for input, and then we will draw the dodger mode. And then lastly, we have the delay, and then we reset the game once that game is complete, and then we will print out setup complete, entering main loop. And yeah.
Okay. Now I'll go over the void loop here. We are just this is going to be the start of like the main loop and where we are telling to the LCD to update. Here we have like a unique current state ID that's computed based on device role, if it's either a shooter or a dodger. Like for the shooter, the ID starts at 1,000, and then for the dodger, the state ID starts at 2,000. And that's what it's doing. And then here, the block is checking if the current state has changed by comparing it to the state ID that we already stated upon. And then the last state ID updates with the new identifier. And then here we are, the shooter role is awaiting for dodger input. So because the dodger has to first pick, the shooter cannot pick while the dodger has not picked yet. And then once it's received, the shooter then can press uh, like can select the barrels. And then here, this whole statement, what it's doing is that when the shooter is waiting for its own input, the focus, like the touch detection is on. The touch detection is based on the XY coordinates, and then it is processing the coordinate that it's been pressed at, and then it's detecting the button detection. It is in point in React to determine which of the three buttons was pressed. So like we have the three barrels that you can pick from, and this is how it's communicating with the Bluetooth to see the result of the shooter after the dodger picks and then after the shooter picks as well. And then, and then here is where the shooter role and like is seen, and then like we'll see if the advance to the next round based on like the results that they get. So it has like a few delays that like to see the outcome of the touch. Then it checks if the game is over, if it's hit or safe. If the game is over, it's it sets the state to shooter game that's the shooter is losing, and then if it's otherwise or vice versa, it advances to the next round by incrementing incrementing the rounds. Then here we can see that the shooter role is being handled here. So when the shooter is in the shooter game over state, the program monitors for a touch input indicating the user wants to restart the game. And it's asking if they would like to restart the game, and then the restart buttons will reset the rounds. And then when there's a response from that, then it restarts the game. But when they restart based on if they previously selected shooter or dodger. So it will just compute that. And then for a device like that's acting as the dodger, it is going to be dodger wait input state, which is it's waiting for the dodger's input here. And then it checks if the one of the three buttons are pressed, which has a little barrel UI. And then once a valid choice is made, it sends the choice over to the BLE. And then that's how the shooter receives a text, not a text, but it says that the shooter can now pick which one to choose from, which one they think the dodger is hiding. And then here, again, it is it's the Doger is in wait mode. The Doger wait for the BLE connection once the shooter chooses, and then once the shooter chooses, the Dodger will get its result based on if they got hit or if they were safe. If they were safe. And then the Dodger roll, then now we will show the overall and the overall result and if they are advancing to the next level. So if it sets the state to Dodger game over, it will ask again to if they want to restart or not. And then once they pick restart, the game the rounds update and they get to restart all over again. And yeah, that's what we did for this project. It was a really fun project, and thank you so much, Dr. Dan, for watching. Uh, and if anyone else watches.